Honourable colleagues, on this solemn day, exactly 2 years after the killing of over 1,200 men, women and children in southern Israel, I'm calling on this chamber to reflect on the horror of that day and the horror of its aftermath every day since, not just in Israel, but also Gaza and the West Bank. I condemn the killing of innocent civilians on October 7, 2023, which has been described as the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. I also condemn the attacks on Jews in synagogues and community spaces in Manchester, Berlin, Warsaw, Tokyo, as well as right here in Ottawa, where an elderly woman was attacked at a grocery store just a month ago. The Jewish community is reeling from these assaults and has called for more action against anti-Semitism and more education about the Holocaust. Even though we are 4 months away from International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we would do well to mark every day leading up to January 27th in the way that the occasion was meant to serve, as a solemn commitment to remember the 6 million Jews and millions of others murdered by the Nazis and to say never again to genocide. We need to mark every day as Holocaust Remembrance Day because we are allowing again today what was to be never again. I can see how difficult it is for many of us to contemplate the idea that the modern state representing a Semitic people who suffered so much at the hands of the Nazis could inflict unspeakable horror on another Semitic people. There are those who say it is anti-Semitic to suggest that the state of Israel could be committing a genocide against Palestinians, but that argument is disingenuous and illogical. It also dishonors the very purpose of Holocaust remembrance and the spirit of never again. There are, of course, some who deny that a genocide has taken place. Genocide has been described as the crime of crimes in international law, and the term has been used liberally to describe many troubling situations around the world where there have been serious abuses of human rights. I do not use the term lightly and defer to experts who apply strict criteria to a claim of genocide. In the case of Israel's assault on Palestine since 7 October 2023, the consensus that a genocide has happened is so overwhelming that we cannot look away. Just last month, the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry...
Senator Wallen. Point of order. If you could for a moment... I'm referring to Rule 613.1 that has to do with sharp and taxing language, and I really do find the use of the word genocide, this language, offensive. I don't think a genocide has been established, and I find it particularly offensive on this day when we are commemorating the grotesque murder of some 1,200 souls, including Canadians. I think it reflects badly on this chamber.
Are there other senators who want to intervene? Senator Wu?
Your Honor, I'm just about to give the evidence for why genocide is taking place, including a citation from the UN International Commission on Human Rights, which made its judgment only a month ago.
Are there other senators who want to intervene on this point of order? Okay. Senator Saint-Germain. Senator Saint-Germain.
Senator Saint-Germain. If I may, Mr. Speaker, I think today is the commemoration of a very sad day, not only for all Jews in the world, but for all humans on this earth. I move that the senator may be allowed to continue his speech tomorrow if it is on another topic than the specific events of October 7th.
Senator Wu?
Your Honor, I consider that a breach of my privilege. I've started my speech. I will, in the course of my speech, elaborate on the points that I've started on. I was just about to make the case that Senator Wallen has objected to. If senators indulge me to allow me to continue the speech, they will see why this case is very strong and why we need to take this very seriously.
Your Honor.
Senator Martin.
Yes, if I may, I just want to support what Senator Wallen and Senator Saint-Germain have stated that this is a very significant day, and we heard a statement about the horrors of October 7th 2 years ago. And so out of my sincere respect for the Jewish community around the world, and for those especially here in Canada, that if Senator Wu would consider continuing the statement, which he has every right to do tomorrow out of that respect, that I think all of us share at this time.
Your Honor, I make the speech out of the deepest respect for the Jewish community. I've already stated very clearly how I condemn the horror of October 7, 2023, how I condemn the acts of violence against Jewish people in Canada and around the world. And I think it does a disservice to Jewish people to not allow the speech to continue on the grounds that some senators' sensibilities may be offended. If the case is you're arguing is that there was no genocide, let that be debated in this chamber, and let me present the evidence for you to consider.
Honorable Senators, I will ask all senators pursuant to Rule 6-13, and I'll read it, just to remind us that all personal, sharp, or taxing speeches are unparliamentary and are out of order. Alors, je demanderai à tous les sénateurs de profiter.
I'll ask all senators to take advantage of this moment to reflect on 613(1) of the Rules of the Senate that say that all personal, sharp, or taxing speeches are unparliamentary and are out of order. And I would encourage Senator Wu and all senators to examine this part of the rules and to take it into account. Please continue.
Has violated the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide by, quote, killing, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of Palestinians in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent births. The responsibility for ending the genocide rests above all with Israel, but not Israel alone. All states, including Canada, have legal obligations under international and domestic law to end the genocide and punish those responsible for it. Which brings me to my motion. I am calling on the Government of Canada to examine the risk to Canada and Canadians of complicity in violations of international law, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, and to report on its findings within 3 months of the adoption of this motion. Why do we need this motion? Well, over the last 2 years, serious violations of international law have been perpetrated in Gaza. These vile acts have been live-streamed on our phones and broadcast by Israeli leaders with arrogance and seeming impunity. What did we do to try and prevent it? What have we done to make it easier for Israel to commit war crimes? Why did we proscribe and punish Canadians from trying to do what they could do to raise the alarm? Why is there a double standard in the way we have responded to the situation in Gaza compared to, say, Ukraine? These are just some of the questions that my motion seeks answers to. And not just answers from the government, because these are questions we need to ask more broadly of Canadian society. How have universities acted against students and teachers advocating for Palestinian justice? What have they done about their investments in Israel? What about corporate Canada and our pension funds? How have professional bodies, hospitals, school boards weaponized anti-Semitism to silence their members from speaking out against atrocities in Palestine? Why has the media been so one-sided in its reporting on the situation in Palestine? And what role did that play in allowing the genocide to unfold? What amount of foreign interference and disinformation on behalf of Israel and its allies did our security and intelligence agencies allow in Canada in service of war crimes? The prohibition to commit genocide is a jus cogens, a peremptory norm from which no party, including individuals and corporations, can derogate. In tabling this motion, I'm calling on Canadians to have a national conversation about what we did while a genocide was unfolding before our very eyes. This may be an uncomfortable conversation, but it is a necessary one that is already taking place across the country. For example, a citizens' tribunal on Canadian complicity is being planned for November, mirroring the work of the Gaza Tribunal in the UK and modeled on the famous Bertrand Russell Tribunal on U.S. war crimes in Vietnam. The question of complicity is not an academic debate. It is a matter of international law which Canada claims to uphold. The ultimate test of our adherence to international law is when we find ourselves on the wrong side of it. And in the case of Israel's genocide in Gaza, we may well be in that uncomfortable position. The UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory said in the October 2024 position paper, quote, "The Commission also takes note of state responsibility through complicity, namely when a state knowingly aids or assists another state in the commission of an internationally wrongful act. The Commission notes for violations of international humanitarian law, it has already reported that Israel has committed war crimes in the context of the war in Gaza since 7 October 2023. On the issue of genocide, the Commission notes the provisional measures orders issued by the court in the application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip. The Commission finds that all states are on notice that Israel may be or is committing internationally wrongful acts in both its conduct in the military operations in Gaza and its unlawful occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Thus, the Commission finds that unless states cease their aid and assistance to Israel in the commission of these acts, those states shall be deemed to be complicit in these internationally wrongful acts. The Canadian government's position, as articulated most recently by our newly appointed ambassador to the UN, is that it is waiting on the International Court of Justice to come to a final pronouncement on whether a genocide has taken place in Gaza. This is, at best, a misunderstanding of international law. The Convention on Genocide is as much about preventing a genocide as it is about punishing the perpetrators. Canada has been put on notice of an impending genocide at least as early as January 2024. And in the most latest advisory from the ICJ in April 2024, it said that all states must, quote, employ all means reasonably available to them to prevent genocide so far as possible, unquote. Throughout these early months in Israel's assault in Gaza, the Canadian government position was largely to defend Israel's actions. We heard it in this very chamber from the former government representative who, in answer to my repeated questions on the subject, claimed that humanitarian aid was not impeded by Israel, that there was no targeting of civilians by the IDF, and that Israel's actions were well within its right of self-defense. Yet the UN High Commission for Human Rights and numerous human rights organizations have documented intentional blockade of humanitarian and food, as well as the weaponization of aid through private contractors. All of this information is known to the Government of Canada. The government has acknowledged as much by issuing periodic statements expressing dismay about the situation in Gaza. Perhaps the strongest statement came on May 19, 2025, when together with the UK and France, Canada stated, quote, "We strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's military operations in Gaza. The level of human suffering in Gaza is intolerable. We call on the Israeli government to stop its military operations in Gaza and immediately allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. If Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete actions in response." Well, the military offensive was ramped up and Israel continued to restrict humanitarian aid to the point that the UN has called Gaza the hungriest place in the world. 4 months after the statement, Canada still has not taken any concrete actions to stop the slaughter and restore humanitarian aid into Gaza. In the meantime, the horror has deepened. Today, with more than 200,000 Palestinians killed or injured and almost all of Gaza's infrastructure obliterated, we can look back on our empty, pious statements and see them for what they were. Under the Genocide Convention as well as domestic law, Canada is obliged to take all reasonable actions within its power to stop the assault on Gaza. Instead of upholding our legal responsibilities, however, Canada has continued to assist Israel by maintaining strong military, political, and economic ties with the Israeli government. For example, Canada permitted exports of military equipment to Israel between October and December 2023, amounting to $28.5 million, more than the total amounts approved for the full years of 2021 and 2022. It was not until March 2024 that the Foreign Affairs Minister announced that Canada would suspend future applications for the export of arms to Israel. Yet a group of NGOs released a report in July 2025 documenting ongoing shipments of military goods from Canada to Israel, including shipments of bullets, military equipment, weapons parts, aircraft components, and communication devices between October 2023 and July 2025. When asked to explain these shipments, the best that Global Affairs could offer was that the information employed by the NGOs drawing on Israeli customs data was not consistent with the datasets used to administer the Export Permits Act. The Government of Canada also allows the recruitment of volunteers into the Israeli military for combat as well as non-combat assignments in contravention of the Foreign Enlistment Act. We are, in effect, turning a blind eye to Canadians who are aiding and abetting war crimes on behalf of Israel. Another factor in possible Canadian complicity is in our failure to impose financial or economic measures on Israel. Canada has not sanctioned any member of the Israeli military or Israel as a state. In other words, in the words of the ICJ July 2024 advisory opinion, Canada has failed to, quote, cease all financial, trade, investment, and economic relations with Israel that maintain the unlawful occupation or contribute to maintaining it. Canada continues to provide trade benefits to Israel through the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement. CIFTA, as it's called, has long been in violation of international law by failing to differentiate between goods and services from Israel and those from the illegally occupied territories, including the occupied Syrian Golan. That we still offer preferential market access to Israel during its genocide in Palestine only compounds our disregard for international law. Honourable colleagues, some of you will be thinking that it is self-defeating for our government to admit to complicity because of the damage to our national interest. I am sure that is going through the minds of legal advisors in justice and global affairs, as well as around the cabinet table. The instinct of the government is, of course, to plead plausible deniability, that we did what we could, that we didn't know until now, that our hands were tied, that we are interested in solutions rather than blame, etc., etc. We may even end up arguing that a genocide did not take place as a way of absolving ourselves from the responsibility of not acting sufficiently to prevent it. That would be the kind of cynical, twisted logic that allowed Canada to pretend for 150 years that it did its best for Indigenous peoples, that it had no idea of the harms caused, and that the past is best left buried and forgotten. It took Canada over a decade to acknowledge and apologize for its inaction on the Rwandan genocide. Will it take as long again on Palestine? That the world failed to stop another genocide when it had the chance to do so is a stain on all countries. The sooner that Canada can come to terms with its role in that failure, the better it will be for our moral standing in the world and our ability to be taken seriously on global issues. Now that we have recognized the state of Palestine, our responsibility to uphold international law for Palestine is greater than ever. There are many angles to this motion, and I invite honourable colleagues to speak to any of them. If we pass this motion soon, we may even have a response from the government in time for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We will then learn on 27 January 2026 if Canada really means never again when it says never again. Thank you.